Hello, I'm Karim Rahshid, and I'm a designer, and I've been practicing as a designer for approximately 40 years now. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background, just so you have an idea about where I came from and where I'm going. When I was a child, first of all, I was born in Egypt, and my father's Egyptian, and my mother is English. And we moved from Cairo to Rome for about a year. And my father had a very interesting background. He was a fine artist, a painter, but he was also a set designer for film and television. So he started working in Cinecittà in Rome. So we were there for about a year. And then he got a painting exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in Paris. So he was typically sort of the artist nomad. He packed up the family and we went off to Paris, and we spent a year in Paris while he had his exhibition. And then we went to England and we went to London, and he started to work as a set designer for BBC television. Now, when we got to London, I was about 5 years old, and I would go sketching with my father all the time in London, and we would tend to sort of draw anything and everything that we would see around us. So he liked to draw churches a lot. So we would go out in the afternoon with our sketchbooks, and I would sit with my father and we would sketch churches. And he used to say to me, always draw exactly what you see. Don't draw what you think you see. And that was very important to me, those words. They were actually sort of critical, maybe, to the way I see the world. Because what I realized is that what we see in front of us is a world that was shaped by others. But this is where these courses would be very inspiring for you, because I don't want people to design what they see. I want people to improve the physical world that they see around us, to elevate it. So those words were quite powerful to me. And I was drawing a church with him, and it was a Gothic church. It would probably be late 13th century. And the portico, the doors were sort of shaped like this, like medieval, typical medieval form, and also the windows. And a friend of mine, a neighbor, I was 4.5, 5 years old, in front of their house, they had a white picket fence, and they had the exact same form of the top of the fence. And my friend climbed on the fence, and he fell. And he really hurt himself on the points of the fence. And I remember an ambulance coming. I remember him going off to hospital. And for me, it was a bit traumatic to see this happen. So when I was drawing the church, I thought those points to me seemed very sort of dangerous, let's say. So I decided to change the point to a more soft, round form. And I made the windows a bit softer and rounder too. And my father looked at me and he said, you're not drawing what you see, as I taught you. And I said to him, but I don't like the form that I see. And for me, that was the beginning of realizing, kind of a self-realization. It was kind of a cathartic moment that I realized that I could change the world I see. That actually I don't need to accept what I actually am given, but I can go into this world and improve upon it. And I felt this was an improvement anyway. So that was a very young childhood experience. Then after that, we went off to Canada from England, and my father started working in television at CBC. And there was a library at the television company he worked for where he would borrow books. And we had a coffee table in front of us that had books on every type of applied and major arts you could think of. So I was looking at books from fashion designers like Givenchy and Yves Saint Laurent and Jean Courrèges and Pierre Cardin. At the same time, the piles of books were Picasso and Monet and Corot and Dadaism and Italian Futurism and everything imagined. And on top of all that, there were books on architecture, everything from Le Corbusier to Oscar Niemeyer and the Bauhaus. So as children, my brother and I, all we did constantly were look at all these books. On top of that, he would bring home magazines, everything from architecture magazines to Italian Vogue. And I would be drawing constantly. And we would draw from the books and what we see. And this was a moment when I also realized that here was my father, who not only was a set designer for film and television, not only a painter, but he also designed all the furniture in our home. He designed textiles. And on top of that, he used to, on Sunday mornings, wake up and he would sketch my mother. And then he would roll out some fabric, cut a pattern, take a sewing machine, and sew my mother a dress. And that evening, I see them go off to a party with my mother wearing a dress that he designed that morning. So this was eye-opening for me because I realized that as a designer, we don't have to be specialized. We can be pluralists, and we can shape every aspect of daily life. And everything in our lives, physical and now virtual, have a huge impact on our well-being and our daily experiences. So when you look at the space around you, for example, the floor, the shoes I'm wearing, the chair I'm sitting on, the watch, the eyeglasses, the architecture, what's behind me, the cameras that are actually looking at me at this moment, recording me, are all in one. They all are part of an ongoing, non-stop landscape of objects, things, technology, products, architecture, space that shape all of our lives. And that's what design really is. Design is about elevating the human experience. Those are some of the very inspirational moments of my formative years that got me interested in design. And then I was going to go off to university and I was confused. Do I study? Because then I realized, well, the landscape is actually quite specialized, meaning I either go study fashion design, I go study fine arts, I study architecture, I study interior design, or I study industrial design. And then I remembered some of the books that I really liked and some of the people I really respected. And one of them was Raymond Loewy. And Raymond Loewy was a mid-century American designer, industrial designer, who designed everything from refrigerators to the Coca-Cola bottle to a spaceship for NASA. And I thought, seeing my father be a pluralist, touching many aspects of our daily lives, and seeing these people who I had great respect for touching every aspect of their lives, made me want to go into a field where I could do the same, meaning I could touch everything from micro, something like a bottle, to macro, a piece of architecture. So, but I didn't know what field that was. I mean, what do you study that speaks about a broad landscape of design? So I thought, well, architecture. And why I thought architecture is that the Italians in the 1960s, 50s, 60s, 70s were very profound globally in product design and industrial design. They were doing everything from the Vespa to a coffee machine, to furnishings, to lighting. And I thought, that's what I would like to do. That's the things I would like to do. And the Italians at that time, their education was architecture. And in fact, the subject even of industrial design didn't really exist. So I applied for architecture. And when I applied for school, I was too late and I didn't get accepted. And they said the curriculum is full. They said, would you like to maybe study industrial design? And then in 1 or 2 years, you could transfer into the School of Architecture. And I thought, okay, that's a good way. I can get into architecture. I'll segue, not realizing that industrial design was really the field that was perfect for me. Because when I got into industrial design, I realized that since industry dominates all the production of the world, in other words, whether we're even building architecture, it's based on a lot of industrial design componentry, be it the doors, the door handles, even the foundation, columns, all these parts are sort of aspects of mass production, of industry. So I ended up in the field that was sort of appropriate and perfect for me, and I studied industrial design, and this was in Canada. And then I went off and did a master's, and I did a master's in in Italy, and it was a general degree in design. Studied with some very interesting architects and designers. One of them that had quite an impact on my sensibilities was Ettore Sottsass, who started the Memphis movement in the early 1980s. Another one was Gaetano Pesce, who spoke and was very interested in subjects of creating design that is non-serialized, that every time you mass produce something, every object would be different, which is something actually that hasn't really happened yet in the world with a lot of industry. And then I studied also at night school with Achille Castiglione, who was a very important architect and designer in Italy. I studied and then worked with Rodolfo Veneto, and we worked on everything. I worked on a huge coffee machine for La Cimbali, all the way to doing something like a lamp for Valenti, to doing a television for Brion Vega, and onward. And after that year of working with Rodolfo Veneto in Milan, I went back to Canada and I worked in a design practice. And the design practice I worked in for 7 years was a very, let's say, engineering-driven design practice. So then I found myself designing medical equipment, everything from hospital beds to machinery to chairs for trains. So I did some very complex projects. I did a lot of power tools for a company called Black & Decker, so electric drills, all these products. And what they taught me was, as much as sort of I have a creative side to me, and probably my DNA and my genetics, what I realized is that when you do very pragmatic products, they really have to work. So it's a very good education to really understand the engineering of a product. So all this sort of accumulated to the point of where I am today. I started my own practice in 1993 after teaching at several universities, at Rhode Island School of Design in Providence, and then at Pratt Institute in New York. And in 93, when I opened my practice in New York, really my practice was a Mac 2CI beside my bed. That was my practice. And I started from there and started to do a lot of industrial design, eventually interior design, and then eventually working in fashion areas of fashion accessories and fashion design, and then doing some building and architecture. To me, it's very important not what the category or the typology or the thing is, but what the opportunity is to do something that I could do that would be more contributive and shape a better world, really. Do something that's inspiring, something that works better, something that touches our daily lives, something that's more emotive. And all of this contributes to the field of design. And when I enrolled in design, and we're talking about back in the late 70s, it was not a public subject. Nobody really spoke about who designed this chair. Nobody seemed to really care about our physical world around us. Today, 40 years later, 50 years later, industrial design is a public subject. Design is a public subject. And everybody and anybody and every brand and every company needs to embrace design. So here's an opportunity for all of you to be part of that contribution. For you to be a designer that can really bring better commodity, better things, better spaces to the world and to others. Now, in my class, what we're going to learn is how to design relevant, beautiful, smart, interesting, provocative products, spaces, things that bring meaning to daily life. And what we will do is try to understand how to also be inspired, meaning how can I do something that would, let's say, take the status quo of an object, let's say, let's take as an example a chair. What will I bring to that chair that could be contributive to the rest of the world? The most important part about design is that even though it's driven by industry, it's also driven by marketing, it's driven by price point, it's driven by distribution, it's driven by material production, it's driven by the materials themselves. You always can put your soul, part of you, find yourself, and imbue that into the work you do. In other words, if you take one designer and you compare him to another designer, and the two of them are given the same project, ideally both of them should shape and do something quite different. So how do you find that? How do you find yourself? How do you inspire yourself to do some original work? And it's a great opportunity and a really beautiful life to be able to contribute something original to the world. And I always say the reason you want to contribute something original to the world is because you'll be one of 8 billion people, first of all. So that's quite a high, important aspect as a human to reach, that you've actually added something to this world that nobody else has done. Nobody has even thought about or even managed to manifest. But not only are you one of 8 billion, you're actually one of 250 billion of humanity, because we, in the last 15,000 years, we roughly think there were around 250 billion people on this earth. You imagine that you develop an original idea, you're the first. And remember, everything you see in this world around you at some point was an original idea. And it was manifested and done by a single mind and a single person. So that's something to aspire to. And that's what we will learn, hopefully, in this discussion and in my class, that I want you to go out there and make this world a better place. And there's a great opportunity. There's lots and lots of room to do better things in this world. What's happened a lot, what I've noticed in the design profession, is we're starting to see so much similarity, so many copies of things, and many designers seem to not have any real creativity. So how do we develop our creative constructs? How do we bring and think and intellectualize to be more creative in this world? Because at the end of the day, before you go to sleep, you have to realize that if you call yourself a designer, you must have created something that has a nuance of originality, that has something that you did that others did not do. And for me, that's the goal. The goal here is to actually keep evolving and progressing the world with beauty, really. And what is beauty? We will discuss that later on in one of the lessons. Over the years, I've managed to shape a philosophy that differentiated me from others. In other words, I found my soul and my contribution. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes years. So I went to visit my father in Toronto. He was around 50 years of age. And there was a show at the Ontario Art Gallery on Picasso, a large exhibition. And I said, Dad, let's go see the show on Picasso. And he said, no, I'm not interested. And I was shocked, really, because I never saw more Picasso books in my life than in his home. And he said to me, he said, you know, I spent 50 years of my life looking at other art and looking at other creatives. He says, at this point, I have to focus on what I can contribute, what will differentiate me. So I've decided not to look at any more art. And I was sort of surprised, you know, I was about 20 years old. And when you're 20, you should absorb everything, inevitably. But what his point was is that at some point, you don't want to be derivative of others, but you need to find your own contribution. And later in life, when I started working, I found that it took me to about the age of 40 when I started to understand what my contribution is, what my sensibility is, what differentiates me, who I am, who is Karim. And I realized at that point that there were things that I wanted to speak about in the world. And one was, at that time, was technology. And what I found was the landscape for me seemed very 20th century. And I felt that here we were going into the 21st century, And a lot of product and things around me seemed very dated. They seemed of a different era. I realized they seemed very much of the analog era. And I thought, well, can I start to design space? Can I design ornament? Can I design patterns? Can I design form? Can I shape a world that actually will communicate and speak about the digital age instead of the analog? Or can I bring the analog and the digital together? Also, I wanted in my work to be more painterly, meaning to speak and touch and engage the emotive. I wanted to surprise people, to provoke people, to have people engage experiences with my work that they have never had before. So a lot of the philosophy and things I started to shape was to speak very much about the moment in which I live. And when I say the moment in which I live, not about trends, but about a sociological study, looking at humanity from a distance and seeing the world we live in, and how do I get inspired from that world and make it and beautify it and put it out into the world again. I also, probably going back to the age of 5, felt that things around us as human beings should be soft, comfortable, humanized. And I thought, well, it's nice, it's beautiful to design something so perfect and so clean and platonic and sacred, but could I make it a little more human? And what does, humanized mean? Well, the body, let's say from a physiological point of view, we're asymmetrical, we're fragile, we're volatile, we're temporal. So can I make space and things around us be an extension of the human body? The other part of my feeling and my philosophy was to embrace production technologies, embrace new materials, embrace the opportunities around us. So much is being done. So can I take what's being done and use it in a way that would make a better life for others? So that's very much a sort of very short synopsis of my feeling about every project I work on. What can I bring to the world that would shape a better human experience? And can I bring something that humanizes and touches our emotions, touches us physically, physiologically, mentally, and even spiritually?